So thank you very much for that introduction, Sthiranaga. And I really want to start just by thanking Bodhi Leahy for such an inspiring, in-depth and personal talk, absolutely packed with Dharma. So thank you for that this morning. Similarly to Bodhi Leahy, having the opportunity to speak about the Buddha this afternoon is a real privilege. And to do so as part of the Buddha Day celebration is even more so. But the context in which we were both doing this is very unusual, being in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic and having all of our classes now happening virtually and being online rather than being at the Buddha Centre. It's also unusual for me because I don't think I've ever given a talk with this much hair before. So I don't know how much difference that will make. So in my short talk, I wanted to bring in the context in which we find ourselves, as I feel that this pretty much is flavouring everything that's going on right now. So I want to talk about the faith and courage of Siddhartha Gautama, who was to become the Buddha. This precious opportunity that we currently have to follow in his footsteps, and finally why following the Buddha at this time is the most important thing that we can do. And I want to start by saying how grateful I am to Siddhartha for having the courage and faith to persevere in his quest to break through into awakening. And then as the Buddha, for elucidating a path for us to follow. And it's a path that I first took my tentative steps on some 36 years ago. It's a path that I've tried to follow ever since. It's a path I've wandered away from, doubled back upon, and come back to time and time again. And I'm reminded of Maitreya Bandhu's description in his book, The Journey and the Guide, of the drunk person trying to find their way home from the pub and stumbling around and getting lost. And for 10 years, I was that drunk. And whilst I knew that the path existed, having discovered it previously, and also deluding myself that I was actually still on it, when of course at times I certainly wasn't, I still managed somehow to come back to it time and time again. So I'm very grateful to the Buddha, but I'm also very grateful to all those faithful disciples who continue to shine a light on the Buddha's teachings, obviously the foremost of those being our own teacher, Sangharakshita. But all those teachers that give a different perspective on the teachings of the Buddha so that I might actually understand them more deeply. And finally, I'm grateful for all of you, my fellow travellers on this journey who, like me, are trying their best to make progress on the path. So what about the current context? What about the global pandemic? Well, I'm going to start with a song lyric. So music's been very important to me during this time. And about 6 weeks ago, I started a new practice of asking someone to recommend an album for me to listen to. It had to be something that they really love. And I committed to listening to it in one day at least twice, with one of those occasions being exclusively just listening and doing nothing else. And anyway, this lyric comes from one of those recommendations. And on the TV, the world is on fire. We've all gone insane. And I'm riding on a wave of sorrow. And now on the TV, the world is on fire. We've all gone insane. And I wonder, will we see tomorrow? So you might think that that was written for this time, but actually it comes from a song by a Manchester band called the Slow Readers Club. And it was released in 2018, so before our current pandemic spread across the world. So now for something much older, something from the Buddha, something from more than 2,500 years ago. Bhikkhus, all is burning. And what is the all that is burning? The I is burning, forms are burning, I consciousness is burning, eye contact is burning. Also, whatever is felt as pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, that arises with eye contact for its indispensable condition, that too is burning. And then the Buddha goes on to say that the ear is burning, sounds are burning, the nose is burning, odors are burning, the tongue is burning, flavors are burning, the body is burning, tangibles are burning, the mind is burning, ideas are burning, mind consciousness is burning. Burning with what? Burning with the fire of greed, with the fire of hate, with the fire of delusion. I say it is burning with birth, aging and death, with sorrows, with lamentations, with pains, with griefs, with despairs. And that comes from the Samyutta Nikaya 3528, which is often referred to as the fire sermon. So the Buddha is saying that everything we experience through our senses is burning with greed, hatred, and delusion. So the world was on fire in the Buddha's time, and the Buddha saw this, and as we know, he responded. And the world was on fire in 2018, and maybe some of us were responding to that, maybe we weren't. And the world is still on fire today, and maybe we are responding to that. But the world doesn't burn because of external conditions. The world is not on fire because of the coronavirus. It's on fire because of the way in which we see the world, the false views that we have about the world. So the world burns with greed, hatred, and delusion. And it's for the eradication, for the extinguishment of these poisons that the Buddha sets out on his path for us. So our current situation may give us a stronger sense that the world is burning. But how do we respond to that? So one of the more common responses that I've encountered to that glimpse of the burning world and the reality that the world is on fire has been for people to turn away. So when things get tough, we turn away, we deny our experience, or we seek some sort of escape. We turn towards distractions, towards sensual pleasure, and effectively we ignore the burning world. And that may even involve creating a retreat-like environment for ourselves. This can be very positive, extremely positive, if our intention is to deeply engage in practices that help us confront the greed, hatred, and delusion within ourselves and within our own views. Of course, the Buddha and his many disciples would spend the rainy season in retreat, quite often with prolonged periods of meditation. But this was always followed by long periods of teaching anyone whom he came into contact with. So we just need to be honest with ourselves about whether we are turning towards something that will help us progress on the path, or are we simply turning away from our experience? Another response, which I've seen a lot of, has been for people to become overtaken by various forms of hatred, from the extremes of racial hatred and prejudice that regrettably we are starting to see in different parts of the world, to the irritation at our neighbours entertaining friends in contravention of our lockdown rules. We also might seek to blame. So a lot of blame going on. Maybe the government for not reacting quickly enough, for not testing enough people quickly enough. Maybe we blame those in China where the outbreak appears to have started. Maybe we even blame the bats. And I'm sure certain presidents will arrive at that conclusion at some point in the future. But any type of blame, any type of prejudice or irritation is a form of hatred. And rather than helping us escape from the burning world, they simply fuel the fire that is already consuming us. And another response may be to reflect on the impermanent nature of our current situation. And again, this may be a perfectly valid response. However, there may be a danger of delusion with this approach if we approach impermanence intellectually rather than from a deep sense of understanding. So rather than seeing the changing nature of all phenomenon, We may be choosing to believe that our current unpleasant situation is impermanent because we simply want to go back to normal, to a more satisfactory situation that we then hold on to too tightly as if it were permanent. So a deluded belief that things will be all right when the lockdown measures are lifted. So they may change in the UK this evening, but we'll all be well. We'll all be well when we have a vaccine for this current virus. Well, in reality, the answer is no. In reality, no perceived solution to any difficult experience is permanent either. So in reality, all there is change. Everything is in flow. Everything is changing in dependence upon conditions. There's no safe normal, no safe haven that we can arrive at where everything will be all right, at least not in our conditioned experience. So if we ignore our current experience and label it as impermanent, that's only really useful if we don't try and grasp after a different experience that we want to be more fixed and more normal. So how do we face these challenges, these poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion? So this is where the example of the Buddha can really help us. And as I mentioned at the outset, I want to talk about two great qualities, faith and courage. So we're told that over countless lifetimes, the Buddha continued on his quest. He had seen the world was burning. He'd experienced it, burning with birth, aging and death, sorrows, lamentation, pain, grief, despair. But he had faith. He had faith that there had to be a way out, that there had to be an end to this suffering. In the Majjhima Nikaya, we have the Maha Saropama Sutta, which is often called the heartwood of the spiritual life, where the Buddha describes someone going forth from the householder life into the homeless life, so taking the first step on that spiritual quest. But doing so after having seen the sorrow and distresses in this life, and doing so with faith that surely an end to this massive suffering can be known. And this must be where we all need to begin, with faith that we too can follow the path of the Buddha, and we too can experience the end of suffering. Now, the other great attribute of Siddhartha during his quest before he became the Buddha was his extraordinary courage. The courage to turn away from family when he begins his quest. The courage to walk away from his teachers, Alara, Kalama and Uddaka, both of whom had offered him the status of co-leading their disciples. But somehow he finds the courage to walk away as he felt that he could no longer help to progress on the path. They would not be able to take him further. Turning away from the friendship of the 5 ascetics with whom he'd been practicing for something like 6 years. And then the most potent symbolism of all in the story of his awakening, perhaps showing the greatest courage, his battle with Mara. So we have wonderful images in Buddhist art, including from our own beloved Aloka, who's produced so much inspiring artwork for our movement. And of course, this depicts Siddhartha withstanding the hatred that Mara unleashes upon him in the form of his armies. But it also shows him resisting the sense desire represented by Mara's daughters. So greed and hatred neutralized by his unmoving tranquility. And then we get the final moment. After he remains calm, tranquil, and unmoved by these crude assaults of Mara's final challenge, Mara's last throw of the dice, as it were, as he tries to create self-doubt in Siddhartha's mind, challenging his right to sit at the Vajrasana, the diamond throne where Buddhas have sat before him, and to finally become the Buddha. And here we have another wonderful symbol, again depicted many times in Buddhist artwork, an image that I return to time and time again. This time of the Buddha, so calm, so wonderfully serene, lightly touching the earth with the fingertips of his right hand and calling the earth goddess to witness his practice, to witness lifetimes of practicing the path, effectively of practicing the path of ethics, meditation and wisdom, that same path that I've been attempting to follow and tread upon, and the same path that we teach at the Buddhist Center. And following that path and practicing that path is the greatest, most significant thing that we can do for the world, particularly now. It's also the most meaningful way that I can truly show my heartfelt gratitude to the Buddha, to his disciples, and to those who continue to tread the path with me, by following the Buddha's footsteps on that path that he's given us. And I want to end with a passage from the Sthiranaga, which is a collection of sayings of the Buddha. And this one is called For the Welfare of the Many. In this, he talks about three people appearing in the world for the welfare of the many, for the happiness of the many, and out of compassion for the world. And those three are an enlightened being, the disciple of that teacher, and the learner who is following that path. And today I'm very grateful that I can be that learner and continue to be following that path. And at the end of this particular saying, we have an inspired utterance, which is what I'm going to now read to conclude my talk. The teacher, the great sage, is the first in the world. Following him is the disciple, whose composure is perfected. And then the learner, training on the path, one who has learnt much and is virtuous. These three are chief among devas and humans, illuminators, preaching Dharma, opening the door to the deathless. They free many people from bondage. Those who follow the path, well taught by the unsurpassed caravan leader, who are diligent in the sublime one's dispensation, make an end of suffering within this very life itself. Thank you.